This is part 2 of my series on why Trump is more guilty than anyone of trying to steal the 2020 election. Part 1 is about why Trump's massive lead disappeared and why everyone, including Trump's own team, expected that to happen and therefore knew it was not an indication of fraud. Now, while Trump did do a good job at convincing his fans that there's fraud, he now needs to find the evidence. So his team did thorough investigations, and then when they were questioned under oath in court about what they found, this is what they said. Trump's campaign manager said, people were telling the president, good news, hey, in Arizona, there are all these votes that shouldn't have been cast. That's going to help you. We would come out back on the back end and say, hey, that's not true. Here are the facts. We were suppliers of bad news in instance after instance after instance. Trump's senior advisor said, specific to election day fraud and irregularities, there were not enough to overturn the election. Then they asked, how many times did you have this conversation with the president? To which he responded, several. Trump's top lawyer said what was generally discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative. Then another one of Trump's lawyers said, so I remember a call with Mr. Meadows where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states. This evidence was super convincing for me because when I heard Trump making all his claims, I was assuming that there was all this evidence behind the scenes. But then when you read what his team had to say under oath in court, it turns out what Trump was claiming and what his team was finding was not the same thing. 2 weeks into the investigation, Trump is not happy that his team is telling him there's no fraud. So he decides to put together a new team with people who are telling him that there's fraud. Here's one of Trump's lawyers for his new team that's being very public about the fraud that she's found.
They included an algorithm in Dominion that monitored the race and would adjust the count to keep the election intentionally close. And they could simply add more votes for Joe Biden. The statistical data of how they would dump 300,000 votes into a county at a rate faster than humanly possible to process is a clear indication that a machine just made up that number.
Now here's her under oath telling a different story about what she's found. She was asked, is there in your mind, I guess, conclusive evidence of wrongdoing with respect to Dominion as far as how the votes were counted? And she responded, I don't know. I've not investigated Dominion. Here's another fraud investigator for Trump's new team in the public.
Voter fraud, the threats, the intimidation is overwhelming.
And then here's him under oath in court where he can't lie. They asked, did you come across other evidence that led you to believe that the Dominion machines were used to switch, delete, or inject votes improperly? He asked, that we found at the time? They said that you found at all. And he said no. Now I'm going to go over a couple things by Rudy Giuliani because he was one of Trump's top lawyers in this fraud investigation team. And this is what he claimed in public.
Our country has had its ballots counted, calculated, and manipulated in a foreign country with a company controlled by friends of an enemy of the United States.
Now here's Giuliani in court when asked about that foreign interference. They asked, do you believe there was foreign interference and that there was some malign foreign actor that somehow infiltrated voting machines during the 2020 election? He said, I have no proof of that except I was shown, and this doesn't suggest it was foreign interference, but I guess there were email communications that went to Frankfurt, Germany and someplace else. Here's Giuliani again in public going over a clear example of voter fraud in Georgia.
But this alone does it.
So now they're going to start pulling these ballots out from under this table. This table, the black one, was placed there by the lady with the blonde braids at about 8:22 a.m. in the morning. So she put that table there.
What's the point of bringing them in at 8 o'clock in the morning, not counting them right away in front of the observers, and waiting until 1:30 in the morning and counting them then with nobody around? What that adds up to in any trial, in any court in America, is evidence of guilt.
Two of those election workers then sued Giuliani for defamation. And this was Giuliani's defense. Defendant Giuliani, for the purposes of this litigation only, does not contest that to the extent the statements were statements of fact and otherwise actionable, such actionable factual statements were false. This stipulation does not affect Giuliani's ability to seek set-off, offset, or settlement credit, or his argument that his statements are constitutionally protected statements or opinions or any applicable statute of limitations, or that Giuliani's statement statements in fact cause plaintiffs any damages and the amount of any alleged damages which Giuliani's statements may have caused, or any other legal defense not expressly waived by the stipulation. So with defamation, it's important to prove that the person is lying about the affected party and that the affected party is harmed by those lies. And Giuliani here is saying, hey, I'm not contesting the fact that I lied, but the Constitution protects me by the First Amendment. I'm allowed to lie. And I don't think these people were really harmed by my lies. His defense didn't really hold up, as he ended up losing the court case and having to pay $148 million for his defamation. Giuliani then lost another court case where he was found guilty of making knowingly false statements of election fraud. The referee properly found the 16 acts of falsehoods carried out by the respondent were deliberate and constituted a transparent form of conduct intended and designed to deceive. More specifically, as the referee aptly described, respondent told numerous lies in the numerous forums, all designed to create distrust of the elective system of our country in the minds of the citizens and to destroy their confidence in the legitimacy of our government. It is further ordered that, effective immediately, Rudolph William Giuliani is commanded to desist and refrain from holding himself out in any way as an attorney and counselor at law. So he lost his lawyer license as a result of his dishonesty. And then we have Sidney Powell.
It was funded by money from Venezuela and Cuba, and China has a role in it also. So if you want to talk about foreign election interference, we certainly have it now.
In public, she says she's certain that foreign actors interfered with Dominion voting. And then when asked under oath in court if she believes that foreign actors compromised voting machines and manipulated votes in connection with the 2020 election, she said, I think it's a strong possibility. And then when asked which foreign actors she believed interfered with or manipulated votes in connection with the 2020 election, she said, I'm not saying that somebody in China sat there and changed votes. I don't know whether that happened. Sidney Powell would also get sued by Dominion, and that defamation case is still ongoing, but her defense is that reasonable people would not accept such statements as fact, but view them only as claims that await testing by the courts through the adversary process. So she's essentially saying if anybody was interpreting her claims of voter fraud as fact, like they're true statements, then those are not reasonable people. Like, reasonable people would know that when she claims that there's voter fraud, what she's really saying is, we're going to take these voter fraud claims to court and see if they're true or not. She wasn't actually saying that they were true. So to summarize, what we have is Trump putting together a team to investigate fraud, that team all telling Trump, hey, we have no evidence that there's widespread fraud that's going to change anything about this election. So then Trump gets mad and puts together a new team, and that team is very vocal in public about all the fraud that they're finding. And then when they get questioned in court, they're all like, I don't really know if there's fraud or not. I'm not really sure. Because obviously in court, you can't lie about saying that you have evidence that there's widespread fraud if you don't have evidence that there's widespread fraud. In the next video, I'm going to be going over the defamation case between Dominion and Fox News that's already been settled, where Fox had to pay $787 million for knowingly making false claims about Dominion on their network. Essentially, they were talking amongst each other and they were saying like, hey, we have no evidence of these claims. They're not true, but we're going to air them anyway. Like, they proved that in courts. It's pretty bad, but I'm going to go over it in the next video.